Hello. Welcome to the Blue Metropolis International Literary Festival 2021, an exceptional edition, year 2 of COVID-19. Our theme this year is the challenges of our times, ? My name is Mariane Ackermann. It's my great pleasure to present an extraordinary panel of creative women. Our subject today is theater after COVID. When I first pitched this idea, it was around December. The first vaccine had been announced. Hope was in the air, and we thought that by late April, early May, we'd be comfortably looking back on difficult times. Well, it hasn't quite worked out that way, although there's a lot of good news. But I hope you literary types and writers and readers can curl up with your books, put them down for the moment, and take notice of what's going to be said today. Get re-inspired and add more dreams to the things you're going to do when we all get back to normal, or at least the new normal. My guests are 4 women at the center of creation and performance. All are based in Montreal, or one soon will be. Yet their jobs require them to reach across borders, take Montreal to the world, and bring the world here. What they have in common is not only talent and a passion for the arts of the scène, but a deep knowledge of the milieu, and they have power, a mandate and a means to make work happen. They're gatekeepers, trendsetters, people you should know. So literary types, listen up. I'd like to introduce, first of all, Annabel Soutar, who co-founded with her husband, the actor Alex Ivanovici, the documentary theater company Porte, Parole in 2020. I saw their first productions, and I've seen the extraordinary growth of this company, which specializes in documentary plays. Annabel has written 8 documentary plays, researching a subject and making incredible theater out of it. You might have seen Assembly, L'Assemblée, an episodic documentary theater project on political polarization. J'aime Hydro toured Quebec, played in Montreal for ages. Extraordinary work. Amy Blackmore, executive and artistic director of the Montreal Fringe and the MainLine Theatre. She's a Montrealer, a choreographer, a director. She began as a volunteer at the Fringe at the age of 17 with no idea of a life in the theater and ended up running it. For those who don't know, the MainLine is a pocket theater on Boulevard Saint-Laurent. It's arguably the most exciting theater center for new work and crazy ideas. Companies can come there, rent these wonderful spaces, and break ground with their new work, their new company. In a normal year, 375 performances in 2 spaces. The Fringe is the Montreal version of a legendary world movement. 3 weeks in June, normally 800 plus performances and 500 artists. So this is a very significant number of people. The shows are chosen by lottery, which I think is highly fair in the crazy world of theater. 35% Francophone, 35% Anglo, Quebec, 15% Canadian, rock, and 15% international. Wonderful event. The other 2 women I have here are newly appointed team leaders, co-directors of the prestigious and wonderful Festival Amériques, Jessie Mill and Martine Dennewald. I will reveal my age in saying that I do recall vividly covering as a theater critic for the Montreal Gazette, the first Festival of the Amériques, it was called at that time. This wonderful festival bringing theater from everywhere in 1986. So here we are many years later with quite a different type of festival. Jessie is Quebecoise, studied at the University of Montreal and UQAM, the Sorbonne, writes widely on theater for different journals, and has been an associate at the FTA since 2014. Her partner, Martine, ran a festival in Hanover and Braunschweig, Germany, the Transforming Theater for an 11-day, very important festival. The 2 met on the road at different festivals. And as I understand from Jessie, maybe over a few glasses of wine, I'm just making that up, dreamed and talked about what they would do if they ever had a festival to run. And they had apparently targeted a festival in Germany, but the job here in Montreal came open earlier than expected and they got it. So this trend of 2 people working on a festival at the same time is going to bring a lot of energy. The FTA, as I think most Montrealers know by now, is the place to go for avant-garde, international, cutting-edge, Quebec, Canadian, and international theater. It's held in the spring. It will be held this year in a slightly reduced form, but Martine and Jessie will be taking over and changing the festival for next year. So here we have it, pretty dynamic, creative people who I have brought together so that we can talk in a positive way about COVID. Normally, we start our conversations with how are you, which we've done all that. So now we're going to say to the audience, how are you? And hey, listen up for the future, okay? So I'm going to start by asking, by getting personal and just asking each of you, can you tell me one way that the lockdown, I prefer to think of it as a lockdown rather than a virus. The virus is the cause, well, the lockdown is the problem, okay? We're trying to, stay inside and avoid this. How has it affected you, enlightened you, or changed your approach to your life or your work? Briefly. But tell us, that's my version of how are you? What have you learned? Let's start with Amy.
Thanks. I've definitely learned to be patient with myself. I've had to force myself to slow down throughout this lockdown. And I actually have a unique situation that took place in that I actually had surgery in September. You can see I still have a little bit of my scar. I'm okay. I'm doing well and healthy, but navigating the healthcare system while trying to keep a theater company alive required a lot of patience. So I think that might be the biggest lesson that I've had to learn.
Very good. Very good. Martine?
I'd say I've learned the value of building relationships over time with people in person, because that's what's really been keeping me up and going over the last year or so. And in particular, the festival we made last year during the lockdown in summer in Germany would never have happened if we hadn't built that kind of trust with our collaborators, the team, and the artists.
Wow, great. Jessie?
Yeah, I would say that I reconnected to what I profoundly love of theater, which was not necessarily going to see performances every night and being aware of everything that was happening, but the small chances that I had to see something, sometimes online, but also in September, for example, in alleys in Montreal or outside. And the emotion that I got from that reconnection were really wonderful. And it kind of grounded me to the art. And I could be, I could forget a little bit the weight of everything else, especially during this time.
Okay. Annabel.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of use what everyone said as a springboard, but especially that last note of Jessie's. I feel that I've learned to be very grateful that I'm a theater artist, which sounds so weird because we got shut down at the beginning and we'll probably be the last ones to open up again, along with maybe restaurants. But the fact that we've been in lockdown and not been able to have human contact makes me feel like so lucky that I get to practice the art of human contact, because I think that we all feel a sense of what's important in our lives. And it's making connections, and it's being, when we can, face-to-face with people, and really finding what's precious about that. So I feel that whenever we get back, I'm going to, now that I'm moving into the sort of mid to late stage of my career, I'm going to come back with renewed energy and probably some new ideas about how to double down on the value of theater.
Wow, nice. That makes me feel better already. It's worth doing. Okay, so let's take up this subject that we're now immersed in right now, which is the opposite of that street art and self-questioning. And what about this digital world we've been living in? What kind of impact is that going to have going forward? I think the word Zoom fatigue has come up, but can you each just reflect a little bit on that? And let's start with you, Annabel, and work back. Will digital be a part of your work going forward, or has it even been in the past?
The thing is, I mean, I think it's accurate to say we didn't start living in a digital world with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
We lived in a digital world. COVID made us realize how much we are going to depend on the digital world
Mm-hmm.
more to do transactions, and that there's a really great place for the digital world. Because, you know, certainly in the business community or in, you know, for Martine and Jessie, who I imagine fly around the globe a lot, we don't need to fly in for every meeting. We don't have to do everything face-to-face to make our practice happen. We can substitute some of those meetings for digital meetings. And I'm sure I'm not the only one to say that I've actually been very productive in some ways. And I've met with people online that I wouldn't have met with if we insisted on always having face-to-face meetings. Because I don't know, people had more time, they were more flexible, they would fit in a like 45-minute quick introductory meeting, whereas they might have resisted that in the past. So I just want to say that I think that we're on a continuum, but of course COVID accelerated it. Mm-hmm. And you know, before COVID happened, Parole was already dabbling a little bit in the digital practice. We were starting to develop podcast adaptations of some of our shows. We were live streaming the audio of some of our shows. We were already starting to develop a concept for a digital version of the assembly. So when COVID happened, it kind of, you know, it was very unfortunate because we had to cancel a lot of live performances. But it gave us a moment to say, okay, let's look at the few digital initiatives we have and how can we move those forward at a moment when we have the time and there's a little bit more funding available for those activities. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Jessie?
I agree, of course, on everything Annabel just said about the methodology of the digital world and everything that it brought to us. But I also realized that it's not only about adapting a work for the digital space or for an online experience, but it's really talking about a medium and a language. And we will need time if we want to use that space as a real creative space, if we want to research on the relationship the artists have with the audience on that space. And sometimes during pandemic time, everything was going so fast that we didn't give ourselves that time to think about what it means to go online or to really go through a process of translation of our work that could eventually become digital. So for me, that's maybe the challenge for the future in terms of what we will eventually want to do. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also a challenge for the institutions and the theaters to reconsider all the technology as not only a tool or tools that are important, but also as a real, almost a real discipline in itself.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Martine, just to vary the question a little bit, you're coming from a European experience. So how in Europe has this digital world been very important to keep a theater scene alive in your context? How has it been?
As far as I can tell, there has not been a major difference between Europe and, say, Quebec in that respect. Okay. Mm-hmm. So there have been live streams, there have been original projects that were created for the internet, and some of them really beautiful, in fact. And one of the most beautiful European internet Instagram projects, in fact, is going to come to FTA in a month's time. Mm-hmm. It's called Jeanne d'Arc by French theatre maker Mariane Ackermann. Okay. The other thing I might want to add is that the internet has been used by artists for as long as it's been around. We tend to forget that. Mm-hmm. Visual artists have made net art for a very long time. And I've brought a book in case someone's interested. And since this is a literary audience, this is a great anthology of art on the internet before the pandemic.
Great. Okay. Amy, anything to say on?
I have so much to say about this topic. I'm already feeling so inspired by hearing all of your responses, and I agree with so much of it. But I find that for the Fringe and for what we do, the first 30 years of the Montreal Fringe, it's been a very local festival. We've always had international and Canadian artists, but the public have really been from the community, from Montreal and the surrounding areas. And what we're finding now, I think the next 30 years really is going to be about projecting our work out internationally throughout the entire Fringe movement around the world. Like, it's really brought the festivals together in a way that we never have been able to before. The last Fringe World Congress was in Adelaide, and we couldn't go. We didn't have the budget to attend, but we'll be able to attend every single one forever. So there's this great access that the online world has really given us that we probably could have accessed before, but didn't know until we were sort of forced to. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Good. Great. I wonder, Martine, you've kind of answered this question a little bit, but I wonder specifically if we can think, I've always seen, and I've seen a lot of use of digital within theater, and a lot of companies do it, but I'm wondering now, as a result of this sort of bedroom theater and the widespread jumping off into actors and performers getting out in the digital world, do you think there would be any new aesthetic or anything new that will come to the theater world because of this particular experience? Can you think of any palpable aesthetic changes or explorations that could be happening as a result? Or is it too early to see until we see the actual work?
I think it's slightly too early, and also it's for the artists really to show us the way.
Yeah.
And but I have come across a number of hybrid projects that combined live presence on stage and digital means that have been interesting. So we'll have to wait and see, I think.
Annabel, are you imagining any ways that digital can help increase audiences or reach out to audiences, not even necessarily to put a work in a digital medium and say, watch this, but can you, as a theater company, which is building an audience at all times and very, I would say, audience inspired, in that you're very successful. I mean, in terms of Anglophone Montreal, you're wildly successful in getting audiences, but can you now communicate more effectively or in a different way with your own public and followers as a result of?
Yeah, I think access is a very important word that Amy brought up. The fact of the matter is there 95% of the population of the world never goes to the theater. And so I think that we have a job to let people who spend a lot of their time online just know the fabulous work that's happening in the theater, and put a spotlight on that, and maybe use the online marketplace to just allow people to get a little glimpse in, hoping that they're going to come into the physical space. I think that's one way we can think about it. Just because I think that for a lot of people who don't have a habit of going to the theater, they still have prejudices about what the theater is. And if they can take a glimpse in and see that it's a very contemporary, dynamic, interactive space that in many ways resembles some of the activities that they participate in online, that they might just have a better chance of coming to take a look. Then, of course, there's just the boundarylessness of it. You know, if there's something happening in France, which you don't have an opportunity to see, but you want to get a glimpse into, it doesn't mean that you're just watching a recording of it, because I think as we spend more time trying to figure out how to create hybrid experiences, there'll be more creative ways of doing that, but just that we can reach audiences in different places and bring them into the conversation. And then the last thing I'll say is that for us, we've always been very obsessed about the interactive qualities of theater, in that we depend on the live presence of the audience. That doesn't mean they're getting up on stage and improvising with us, but just that their presence somehow has an impact on what's happening. I think that when you bring in an audience online, they're already very sophisticated in how they interact and how they stack experiences. And so that's where I see a lot of place for innovation when Jessie says, like, we need to spend some time investing in experimentation with this new medium, because it is very different. For me, I like to think about how we can allow the audience to feel their relationship to the work more concretely.
Well, it would seem to me that Porte Parole is ideally placed to really use those new opportunities, in that you have a theater style and methodology, which is, especially with assembly, very conversational. You do have audience questions and participations in that, and that seems to me to be something that we have learned through the pandemic. You can have chat rooms. People can actually express an opinion at the appropriate time. So it's no longer just a fourth wall down. It can be.
For sure. Some people don't like that at all. And it's interesting. We've had very funny conversations because we try to get feedback from our audience. And some of them are like, I hate the chat, because I want to focus. I want to go into have an experience where there's no interruptions and I'm not in my living room and my cat is not walking across, my keyboard. And other people who are like, wow, this is completely added to my experience. So again, we need to be chatting with the audience about what's going on and learn from that.
Yeah. Okay. Jessie, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to add a little something about how it might change the work in the future. And I don't have a clear answer to that, but I was thinking of a few experiences. Playwright Workshop Montreal, developed during the pandemic a real platform to be able to continue with all the workshop and with all the dramaturging process. And they hired a company who were actually digital dramaturgs to work with the artist. And they were giving a lot of training and different tools. And I feel that from what I heard from different experiences, that there will be a change in the way we work, especially with colleagues and collaborators from abroad, even in the rehearsal room, with the possibility of using all these tools. And somehow it will open windows in the scene. I don't know exactly how it will manifest. I think of a couple examples, but yeah, I think there will be maybe not new aesthetics coming right away, but a slow change in the way we collaborate.
Okay. Amy, I don't know if you want to add on to that as well. That would be fine, but I'd like to put a specific question to you about theater outdoors. I know I've had, you've seen alley theater, and I'm writing a commentary on a book coming out about outdoor theater and things that have happened just in other spaces, because you close theaters, actors will get outside and do things. Do you think there will be more innovation, more time and energy put into how to create performances outdoors?
Absolutely.
To match the public's craving. Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, theater outdoors isn't new. It's been around forever, and it will always be with us. I think that the most exciting thing happening right now is that all the rules of engagement are changing. We don't have to theater the way that we were maybe taught how to theater. We can just flip all the tables and do whatever we want to a certain extent. I mean, almost, not quite yet, but the outdoor performance movement is huge. It's huge around the world. You look at buskers, you go to the Edinburgh Fringe, the streets are packed with performers and packed with folks watching those performers. I will say, though, as I presented my own work outside in September at Centaur at the Portico Project, it is very challenging. It changes everything. You have to account for the church bells going off at 4 p.m. on a Saturday, and you have to account for the traffic going by. But it's beautiful. It made our work so much more immersive for the audience. I do think we'll see it continue. My dream is for someone to buy me a Spiegel tent so that we can just only do shows outside. That would be great. I'd let go of MainLine if I had a heated Spiegel tent. That's the dream.
Yeah. I wonder if anybody here is worried about the fact of the kind of inhibiting factor of having been through this viral catastrophe. Are we going to be worried, we, the public, I consider myself mainly a fan, worried about going into rooms and turning the lights out and sitting that close to people? I mean, are we looking at a decade of traditional theater spaces being problematic? Amy, start with you.
Well, I have two words that I think are really important, and I've been thinking a lot about them this week. It's radical hospitality. We need to start exercising radical hospitality so that our patrons and our audiences feel comfortable coming back indoors. And it's about revealing everything in advance. I think it's about being super transparent about what the experience is going to be like to just reduce the anxiety of the patron from start to finish, planning how folks are going to leave the theater, not even just enter. I'm really in the thick of that now, planning the Fringe, because we are doing in-person shows this year. And it's, radical hospitality. We've got to do it.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment on that? Further thought? Should we be thinking more of audiences than we have in the past? Or?
That's just where most of our focus should be. And I mean, that's kind of who we're doing this for. I can't answer the question, how are people going to feel? I mean, I went to the theater recently. I went to Théâtre Jean Duceppe to see a play about a week ago. And nobody seemed afraid at all. I mean, it was very orderly and everyone was sitting at a distance and we all had to keep our masks on. But all I felt was love. Like, thank God we're back here. And, it's crazy because we're so able to control actually the flow of people in and out of the building, and everyone's just sitting still for 2 hours. It's like, seems so much less chaotic than a supermarket. And yet we're also comfortable going in and out of supermarkets every day. Will people pack into a theater the way they did? I have no idea. All I can say is I'm not afraid. Viruses have also been around forever. And I'm afraid that people are becoming a bit too paranoid about transmission of viruses. And we're becoming ultra obsessed about hygiene, which is a good thing for public health. But at a certain point, it becomes very counterproductive because we lose our basic immune systems and our ability to respond. So but I'm one person, and I've had COVID, just to be super transparent, and I was never afraid of getting it, and I was never afraid when I had it. But everybody, it's a very personal thing. And so I think we're going to see very different reactions based on people's age, based on people's relationship to health. And I guess it'll be a cultural thing too. I think the French might go back faster than, who, I don't know. I don't know. That's a total cultural stereotype that was I just improvised that, but
that's okay.
Well, the surveys that were conducted are saying that people are looking forward to come back in theaters and that they will actually come. And the theaters right now, of course, have very few tickets to sell, but it's sold out everywhere. So I think people are eager to be back in the theaters.
Okay. Anybody else have a thought on that?
Yeah, maybe speaking about audiences, I believe there are things we've learned during the pandemic that are not just related to the pandemic. So there are fault lines in society, cracks that have become more apparent. And the Black Lives Matter protests have been a large part of that, obviously. So when we talk about audiences, there's a lot of work for us to do. And we started realizing just how hospitable and how open towards a diversified audience you have to be. I don't know how diversified audiences are in Montreal, but in Germany, there is certainly a whole lot of work to be done.
That actually was my next question. So we're moving ahead of schedule. So really to talk about that, the themes that do you have any feeling now that different themes and subjects will be, in a sense, ordered by what the public is thinking? Will theater become more political, more compassionate, more activist? I mean, I'm just going to step over the line and say, me personally, I find myself incredibly more interested in things like this, in activism, than getting my next play on. I've taken a pause on that. I'm returning to a direct approach to figuring out the world, because to me, the world, I thought I was reaching deep inside and, writing plays and novels about it. But the last thing I want is introspection right now. I want to know what's happening and how can we get out of it. The fault lines are just so in your face about our society. I wouldn't know where to start with the creative work, but comment. Who else has things about that? I think it's such an important that does ultimately touch onto audiences. Amy, what do you think?
Well, I was just thinking about how
themes that theater will pursue, or what?
Oh, I think that maybe I had a little freeze there with my screen, but what I was thinking about no problem. What I was thinking about in the moment of frozenness was just how, French theater is often very personal, because it is the kind of theater that is unrestricted. The artist is allowed to do whatever they want with their time, right? As long as it's within the law, of course. You tend to see personal work, personal story. And I think that's something to continue to encourage. And I think the more opportunities that are out there for folks to tell their story, I think the better. And I think that's happening. I think that it's going to continue. Yeah. Something about breaking down that barrier and just facilitating greater opportunity for folks will serve us well in getting to know each other.
Yes. Okay. Anybody else on that theme? I mean, is there any truth to the idea that it seemed to me that we were all very personal? Theater, with the exception of Parole, which I don't think is about the personal. It's about the personal is political.
Well, it's
is there not such a thing as
just to cut you off quickly there? I think it's about the convergence of the personal and the political. I think it's about individuals who are telling their stories about their relationship to the political world, or what their role is as a citizen. But some of those tales, I think Jessie Mill is probably the best example, is told in a very personal way. And I think that, one of the biggest experiences we've had during COVID is just isolation. Just even though we do have the technology to reach out and talk to people all over the world, there's also some evidence that we're becoming more polarized, that some of these political silos that we live in are becoming more extreme. There's more radicalization, obviously more mental health issues. And so I think people will go back to the theater. It's hard to say what themes, because I think themes, generally there are lots of universal stories out there that can be deeply felt, but that people are going back to the theater to feel a sense of solidarity and to orient themselves about what's going on in the world. Because there are a lot of crazy things going on in the world right now. Like I just look at Hong Kong and the fact that basically that democracy is dissolving right before our eyes. And we're all feeling completely powerless. That has nothing to do with COVID, but it's something that we feel for people in Hong Kong. They would have been out en masse protesting, and COVID made that almost impossible. And there are a lot of other movements, I think, right now where there would have been way more street assembly, protests, people being able to organize. When you take away their ability to get out in the streets, they become desperate about certain issues. And of course, the Black Lives Matter one also is front of mind. So I think people will return, not for a particular theme, but to express a need to converse with each other, understand difference, and find some solidarity in an increasingly radicalized world.
I'd like to underscore this solidarity dimension that Annabel just mentioned, and maybe also riff off what Marianne was saying about introspection and this idea that we used to have that, in fact, the European canon, the white European canon, is universal and applies to everyone in exactly the same way and should be valid for each and every one of our spectators. And recently, with post-colonial studies and indigenous studies, we've realized that that is simply not the case. If we want to talk to everyone, we'll need other stories. And we need to make sure a broad range of stories is heard. So we can't stick to that idea of the universal story or the purely introspective psychological drama anymore. And that will determine, I think, the way artists work and the way institutions curate the work.
Can I turn this question now on you two, specifically as co-directors of Festival des Amériques? What have you got in mind, or what are your personal contacts and interests in the world of international theater, of uncovering these stories we don't know? I know I look sometimes now, we see so many people promoted their, I see you're seeing more visual diversity, and I keep thinking, what is your story? So where are you going? How is your new direction for the festival? Where are you going to look? Who do you know where, and what can we expect?
It's interesting because you introduce us as gatekeepers, and I think it's not exactly what we want to be. It's we are, of course, conscious of the privilege and the power that we've got in our hand, or that we will have, but we really want to be more like gate openers.
Well, a gatekeeper can open a gate. It doesn't mean you have to keep it closed.
Of course. But I think one of the things that we might want, and I won't say change or transform, because it's not just about renewing or making it totally different, but it's maybe more about the way we approach artists and how we want to build conversations and multiply these conversations, and work also with the need that will be expressed after pandemic. We are, as an institution, very protected. We were very protected for all these last months, and the artists were living more and more in a scarcity context. So what kind of setting can we imagine together to be a strong festival in a strong community?
Okay. Martine, anything on that? Tell us more about, maybe you don't want to divulge ideas and things you have plans for going forward, but what corners of the world could we expect to hear from you're looking into?
Well, the thing is, I'm from Europe, and you might expect then, as a consequence of that we'd have lots of European theatre. That is not the case, and dance, theatre and dance. Okay. I have worked mainly in Germany with artists from outside of Europe. We had strong programs of East Asian and Southeast Asian artists, artists from the African continent, Latin American artists. So those are territories that we will continue to explore. Plus, the original idea of the festival that you were talking about in the beginning, Festival de Théâtre des Amériques, the south-north axis of the three Americas, is something we will definitely look into.
Great. Well, we definitely would like to know more about the Latin American, what we've learned about these societies, how they're organized, and the politics and the effect of American adventures and the state of countries and societies in Latin America is something I feel woken up to realize that we need to know more about. How is internationalism going to be affected or going to affect the theater, and what's going to happen from the very basic level? Now we can't fly, we don't travel. I mean, people are being asked to see their own countries and stay in your own province in the Atlantic bubble. Don't even leave the Atlantic bubble. First of all, travel is not as easy anymore. And I think we're going to have an airline disruption for quite a while following this. What's the future of internationalism? Can we start with you two and then move out, because you're in the international hub of it all? I mean, you're running an international festival. How many levels will this pandemic affect of your work?
I think the big challenge is not the pandemic, but the climate crisis, really. That's following it. And obviously the whole sector needs to rethink their practices, but the whole planet needs to rethink their practices, their work and travel practices. So we're not alone in this. And people have started thinking about this. The Theatre Trust in the UK has published a green book for theatres with sustainability practices. So there are movements coming up that will help us redefine how we work.
I think there's many different level of actions that we want to develop, of course, but some small things that we could share are the idea of not always thinking of bringing a crew and a whole production from abroad to Montreal, but working differently with collaborators that would come for maybe a longer period and build our production here with Montreal actors, for example, or Montreal dancers. We can also, we wish, actually, I don't know how fast we will be able to do that, but we wish to develop a regional network, and maybe also a network with other provinces and the closest city in the United States, so that production that are coming to FTA would have more occasion to be presented elsewhere. And there's a whole, I would say, range of practices that we would like to bring to our team, but we have to keep in mind that we also need to make some space for international performance and even big shows, because it's nothing in comparison with other industries, with other problems that we have also related to the climatic crisis. And I think artists and audience need to be in contact with these practices from abroad.
There is in fact a model that is really helpful in thinking about these issues, in weighing environmental issues against and with social issues. I don't know if you've come across it. It's called the donut economies by Kate Raworth. It's a concept that she developed a few years ago. I'm not sure I'm able to explain it quite as clearly as I should, but it's like the outer rim of the donut is the limit that our ecological resources give us. How much ozone can we have in our atmosphere? How acid can our oceans be to still allow for life? And the inner rim of the donut are social aspects. How many people do have a political voice, gender equality, arts, education, all of that. And so the breadth of the donut describes exactly where you can move and how you can weigh those components against each other. It's a nice model to start thinking about.
Excellent. I'd just like to turn, unless anybody else has anything to say about that theme, I would like to do a 90-degree and end on a positive note, but first maybe a note that isn't so positive. What, in your experience, observing your friends, colleagues, the theater, the professionals in theater, I'm thinking the actors, the people who depend on things happening to do their work, and an actor cannot necessarily just take the time and refresh and make a long-term plan, Is there going to be a hemorrhaging or a loss of talent in the profession of theater because of this long period of unemployment and denial of work? Is there any reason to fear this will cause people to leave their work or find other things to do? Do you have any evidence of that in your milieu or any concern about this?
I mean, I see Amy nodding too, but anecdotally, I can see people in my sort of network who have left.
Yeah.
Just because they just haven't been able to survive financially, and they're looking forward and going, it was already very precarious to begin with. And now there's so many unknowns about when we're going to have a sustainable practice. And so people starting new careers, you know, really like mid-career, in their 40s, even 50s, saying, I've got to, I have to turn this around now. I can't wait through this uncertainty. And, you know, I think those of us, you know, luckily Canada has been quite generous in terms of the federal wage subsidy. So those of us who run companies, we've been able to keep a lot of our employees, our administrative employees on board. And at Parole, you know, we've tried to continue to do activities where we pay artists as much as possible just to get that money into the system. And it's not just about money, it's just about keeping everyone's muscles going, you know, getting into rehearsal, developing new work. As soon as we were able to get back in a rehearsal space, we did, and to broadcast a few activities online so that people, not just actors and designers, but production personnel could get work. But there's no question that we will see some hemorrhaging. I just have anecdotal evidence. I don't know what the numbers are exactly, but it's been.
Among those people who do take the leadership in their professional field very seriously, is there any talk or hope for some kind of unionization or a guaranteed income, like in Europe, that an actor who has a certain amount of work level happening has something to fall back on? I mean, the Shaw Festival is swimming in money because they had insurance, but actors, you know, we've seen now that, imagine what it's like to have the CERB and the CRB, whatever, as there to catch you. Can't the performing arts, which is such a huge industry, have some kind of support net for people who are active professionals? Things happen.
I think I'd love to jump in here and just say, I think there is a push for a basic income for artists. You can read about this in the media. It's definitely being discussed right now, not only in Quebec, but across the country. And it's really important that we start to develop systems that are going to protect our entire industry moving forward. You know, hopefully once we're through this pandemic, it doesn't happen again. But, you know, I think that what this experience has certainly taught me is how much we've taken the folks we work with for granted. I think, we had to let go of our staff right before the Fringe last year, and it was really hard. And it was because they were all contract workers. We're not hiring any contractors this year. Everyone's going to be an employee so that they can be protected through the wage subsidy, for example. I think there's a lot of work to be done. And I want to say I also see folks leaving. It's definitely happening, artists. But it's also happening with cultural workers. We're tired. I'm tired. I can definitely say that, we're all working our butts off to make sure that our spaces don't close and that they stay, and that there's something that we can keep building after. So that's happening for sure. I think the basic income, though, that moving ahead, I think it's time. It's time to have a real conversation about how important the work of artists, theater and beyond, how important that is to society and how important it is to the cycle of society, of a healthy society, of how much it really contributes to the taxpayers.
Excellent. Great. Well, listen, I think I'd like to leave it on that. Turned out to be a positive note. I do feel that's very inspiring. And I just want to say to the literary world who might tune into this Zoom when it's broadcast to reintroduce Annabel Soutar from Porte, Parole, Amy Blackmore from the Fringe and MainLine Theatre, Jessie Mill and Martine Dennewald, who are taking over this June to be the new artistic directors of Festival of Amériques. I want all my friends out there in the literary world who might be listening to this to take note of these names, Google them, and put them in your agenda to follow this work, see where this conversation goes. There's so much to be had in the idea of bringing the literary and the theater world together. I could have a whole panel on that subject, and I hope this is a beginning that there's so much to talk about. So thank you very much, four of you, for being with me here, and good luck to the Blue Met International Festival. It's carrying on as this is broadcast, and we hope that this time next year there'll be another panel and we can do a retrospective on these ideas and where did they go. So thank you very much, and thank you, Blue Met, for this opportunity. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.